And just so everybody knows, this will just be shared with people who registered for the event. So it's not going to be shared publicly or anything like that. And so, yeah, my name is Luke Johnson. I am the operations director for the Cognitive Immunology Research Collaborative, or CIRSE for short. And CIRSE is the nonprofit behind the Mental Immunity Project, or MIP for short. And if you're not already familiar with MIP, it is an ambitious 10-year effort to substantially reduce human susceptibility to mis and disinformation. And this is our first free workshop. And the goal here is to empower you with some useful habits of mind and to invite you into the growing mental immunity movement. And shortly here, I will pass it off to Andy, who will be running the workshop. And Andy is the founder of CIRSE and the chief catalyst of the Mental Immunity Project. He's the author of Mental Immunity, Infectious Ideas, Mind Parasites, and the Search for Better Way to Think. And he is a research associate at Carnegie Mellon University. All right, Andy, I'll pass it off to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Luke. And thank you all for being here. It's gratifying to see such a good turnout. A couple of my favorite philosophers each said in their own way that if you hold a thinking workshop, basically nobody will show up. Charles Sanders Peirce said that basically everybody thinks they're proficient enough in the art of reasoning already. So don't try to make a living at selling critical thinking instruction. And then Thomas Hobbes, the English political philosopher, pointed out with wry humor that everybody seems to be content with the share of wisdom they've already been allotted, which he remarked with ironic, seems to be a good reason to think that it's pretty evenly distributed throughout the world. In any case, we're delighted you're here. We hope you take from this something you can use on a day-to-day basis, and that you will also find ways to get involved and help us spread mental immunity skills behind mental immunity to mis and disinformation. So last week, I was chatting with a radio podcast host before going on air, and he surprised me by saying, Andy, I like to have kind of in-depth conversations about really difficult questions, but this whole Israel-Hamas thing has bringing out so much vitriol that I really just don't want to go there. The word he used was, that topic is just too treacherous right now. So he asked me if it would be okay if we steered clear of that topic. Now, I also like to discuss difficult questions, and I think it's important for us all that we have the difficult conversations, because when we postpone them too long, that ends up coming back to I think, bite us in the rear. But I agreed. And then a couple days later, in fact, it was just might have been yesterday or the day before, I was reading an article in Washington Post where it basically said that debates about the Israel-Hamas situation are tearing families apart. The whole article was about how one of the passages said that this conversation has become so treacherous, and they used the same word, treacherous, that the podcast host had used. And I got thinking about this. Made me realize I've read articles recently about how college students seem increasingly reluctant to have difficult conversations about ethics and politics and religion. And there seems to be, I'm not sure why it's the case, but it does seem as though some of these topics have become extraordinarily treacherous in recent decades, which raises a number of questions. Among them, why is this happening? Why is it that these conversations are so difficult to have and have go in a fruitful way? And more importantly, perhaps, how do we actually make these conversations less treacherous? What do we have to do to make difficult conversations fun and enlightening again? My answer to this question in just 2 words, well, maybe it's 4, is I think we need to do more to cultivate what we call mental immunity. And by mental immunity, I mean a couple things. First and foremost, I mean non-susceptibility to mis and disinformation, or kinds of information that it's problematic to rely upon. Basically, I'm talking about the ability to spot and shed information that is defective in one respect or another. And when I talk about mental immunity, I'm talking basically like about critical thinking, but I mean more than what traditional critical thinking advocates have meant by that. Most people think of critical thinking as a deliberate, conscious process that helps us spot bad ideas, and that's fine. But there's a whole lot of subconscious things that go into what I call healthy mental immune function. In other words, good thinking requires that our subconscious minds be working in tandem with our conscious minds to spot and weed out the bad stuff. And a lot of the critical thinking instruction that I was taught to impart when I was in graduate school paid relatively little attention to the social and emotional dimensions of good critical thinking. So why do I use the term mental immunity? Well, it turns out that minds acquire resistance to problematic information in much the same way that our bodies acquire resistance to infectious microbes. You expose our bodies, so a vaccine exposes our bodies to a weakened form of a virus, say, and in doing so teaches the body's immune system how to spot that virus and to counteract it. Turns out that's the best way to build mental immunity too. You expose a mind to weakened forms of problematic information. You bracket that problematic information by saying, hey, don't believe this, but some people say, and then you say, and this is highly problematic. Make sure you don't get suckered in. Here's why it's problematic. You bundle together a few claims like that, and that's called what psychologists are now calling a psychological inoculation. And it turns out to be a very, very powerful way to make people less susceptible to mis and disinformation. Some people call it pre-bunking because it works on information that arrives later rather than debunking, which is trying to clean up a cognitive mess after somebody's already bought into a bunch of wrong-headed or problematic ideas. Now, the idea that minds can be inoculated was first put forward 62 years ago by this man here. I'm going to share my screen. Hang on. I may have clicked the wrong thing. Try that again. Okay. So William McGuire was a social psychologist who realized that you can expose a mind to a weakened argument and teach that mind essentially how to generate counter arguments in such a way that they're no longer susceptible to the original argument. He called this inoculation theory, and it's basically been a fairly a backwater sub-discipline within psychology for the better part of 6 decades. But inoculation theorists have been doing some of the most important work in psychology, I think, in recent years. And at the same time, they were reviving McGuire's research program and revitalizing it. I was working on the book that Luke mentioned, which arrives at some of the same conclusions from a philosophical argumentation. I ended up concluding that the idea that the mind has an immune system isn't just a metaphor, that minds really do have immune systems, and that these systems are evolved to protect us from infectious information, but that we've largely overlooked them to our detriment. But that if we start to understand how the mind works through the lens provided by the concepts of immunology, that we can begin to better equip ourselves to navigate a world full of information hazards. So the basic argument of the book is, I'll just summarize it here briefly, is that misconceptions are essentially mind infections. Misunderstandings are essentially mind infections. And that for practical purposes, bad ideas and misinformation are mind parasites. Every one of us harbors thousands of mind bugs, that it's really important to debug our minds, and that outbreaks of mass irrationality can and should be understood using the tools of epidemiology, because bad ideas, outbreaks of bad ideas have been shown now by historical scholarship, among others, to be best explained via an epidemiological model. And that's why the World Health Organization talks about infodemics, meaning outbreaks of problematic information that end up being harmful. So, but again, the good news is that our minds do have systems designed to detect and weed out bad information. They actually produce antibodies the same way our body's immune systems do. Our minds, we experience cognitive antibodies as doubts. So doubts, I think, are arguably the antibodies of the mind. But we actually need to retrain our mind's immune systems to care about truth as much as we care about usefulness or personal advantage. And that when we do that in roughly the way that good science education does, that we end up strengthening the mind's immune system in ways that serve all of us really well. Now, when some people hear this idea, they immediately say, well, if our minds have highly evolved immune systems, then why are people so gullible? Why is it people can fall for such crazy ideas? Well, it turns out mental immune systems can function at a very high level under the right conditions, and they can function very, very poorly. They can break down and malfunction under the wrong conditions. And the science is actually a science that I call cognitive immunology. I gave the emerging science of mental immunity a name, cognitive immunology. This both incorporates the insights of inoculation theory, but also the insights of several other disciplines. I think that cognitive immunology is going to give us enough insights into how the mind's filters work that we can look forward to a day where we can dramatically improve what we've long been calling critical thinking skills. In other words, the science is enriching what a lot of us consider to be top-end critical thinking instruction, and I think the enhancement of critical thinking instruction could not come at a better time. So CIRSE is the institute I founded to bring together scholars and activists who are working on this issue. And I want to give you an example of the kind of finding that some of the empirical scientists in our network have come up with. This is one of my favorite findings in the field, and it comes from a different group, not one of our affiliates. But this is a group coming out of Canada led by Gordon Pennycook. And he basically found that there's a very strong correlation between the belief that your beliefs should change in response to evidence and immunity to various forms of misinformation, conspiracy thinking, propaganda, pseudoscience, science denial. In other words, if you lose the conviction that beliefs need to change when new evidence comes along, when you lose that conviction, your mind becomes more susceptible, more vulnerable to various kinds of misinformation and belief traps. So there's now very strong empirical grounding for the idea that we should be teaching people that we have almost a sacred obligation to revise our beliefs when new evidence comes in. In my book, I call this idea reason's fulcrum, because when people don't accept this idea, they become immune to persuasion. It becomes impossible to reach them. It's like the fulcrum that allows a lever to work. And Zafir, who's with us today, and I have done some really interesting work on the notion that a lever and fulcrum is a nice way to model a particularly important aspect of mental immune function. We think we know enough now about the mind's immune system to begin translating it into practical tools that anyone can put to use. We think that this mental immunity framework is going to brings a new paradigm and a new way of looking at the problem into the sciences, and we expect the science to produce some really interesting results in coming decades as a result. But we don't think we can sit around and wait to learn more. We need to start translating what we already know into tools that people can use to protect themselves and the people they care about from information hazards. So we built this website that you're looking at now. It's called the Mental Immunity Project website. It's at mentalimmunityproject.org. Luke here has had a big hand in helping us build it. We think this site contains some of the best resources anywhere for building up the kind of habits of mind that make people less susceptible to particularly manipulative information. I want to give you an example of the kind of content we've created and put on this site. And so I'm hoping that when I click this, you will get to see an approximately 1-minute video. Here you go.
No one is right about everything. The question is, what are we wrong about? And how would we know? The truth is this: it's not enough to have reasons for our beliefs. Confirmation bias and motivated reasoning are powerful and often result in undeserved confidence. We can find evidence to support any belief, including false ones, if we look hard enough. A better way to assess our beliefs involves actively looking for ways that we might be wrong. Instead of trying to validate your beliefs, try to invalidate them. Look for evidence that would disprove, not prove. Beliefs should be able to survive tough questioning, including objections from those who disagree. If it's true, it will withstand the scrutiny. Doubts are the mind's antibodies, generated to fight off problematic information. So learn to listen to that little voice in your head that says, I'm not so sure about this. Lean into those doubts. They're opportunities to learn.
Pretty cool, huh? That's our education director, Melanie DeFesta-King, who's also the founder of Thinking is Power, a wonderful online resource for critical thinking skills. What you just saw was a 60-second distillation of one of what we call 10 principles, each of which we think can have an outsized effect on a person's life if they take it to heart and try to apply it. And so in approximately 10 installments of 1 minute apiece, you can learn what we think of as some of the most high leverage things you need to know to become a really capable critical thinker. So we hope that you'll spend some time on this site learning about mental immunity and how to cultivate it. And we hope you'll share it with others. Now, the question cognitive immunologists wrestle with is, what are the conditions that support healthy mental immune function? And I could just tell you about a bunch of things that we have found are conducive to healthy mental immune function. And I could also tell you about a bunch of the things that we have now know are disruptive or disruptive of healthy mental immune function. But rather than just tell you what others have found, I want to sort of invite you to discover some of these things yourself. So what I'm going to do instead is provide a clue, ask Luke to break us into breakout groups, and then invite each group to reflect for about, well, to discuss the clue for, let's say, 7 or 8 minutes. Try to extract from it answers to the question, what are the external conditions, or what are the environmental conditions that help people's mental immune systems, which is to say their mis and disinformation filters? What conditions are conducive to healthy mental immune function? Okay, so you got your task. So when you find yourself in one of the breakout groups in a few minutes, I hope you'll introduce yourselves to those there, and then together discuss the quote that I'm about to show you, and then see if you can extract from it some educated guesses about the conditions that help our minds work better. Okay, especially in treacherous or volatile situations. Okay, so here's the quote. Oh, forget that. So the Scottish philosopher David Hume, I think one of the most capable and profound thinkers ever, once observed or remarked that the truth springs from arguments among friends. I want you to reflect on what's packed in, or what might be packed in, to that simple observation, and see if you can extract from it some of the conditions that make for healthy mental immune function. Okay, everybody got the idea? I'm going to stop sharing here. You can see your faces again. Yeah, I want to give people a chance to get actively involved here. We hope that those of you who have elected so far not to show your faces will perhaps do so in the breakout rooms. At the very least, share your ideas. And when you come back to the main group, again, bring some of your best guesses as to what environmental conditions are conducive to healthy mental immune function. Okay, Luke, could you
Yep.
send to breakout rooms? We're going to come back together in 7 or 8 minutes. We'd like to hear what you come up with.
All right. So everybody should have an invite to a room now.
Okay, everybody good? See you in a few.
Great party.
All right, is everybody back?
Oh, there he is.
Looks like it. All right. So if you all could, I think you may have to call up the chat window again, but either verbally or in the chat window, can people share some of the conditions that they think are conducive to healthy mental immune function, whether you extracted them from Hume's quote or from background knowledge? What did you come up with?
I don't know what you mean by entering it into the chat window. I don't see a chat window.
We do.
So at the bottom of the screen, there should be a button that says chat.
Oh, yeah.
If you click on that, and then there's, it might take up some of your screen real
Oh,
estate.
yeah, you want it written, so you don't want it verbal, so you want to.
Tell you what, let's go verbal. I think given our numbers, I thought if our numbers were that much bigger, the written might help. But tell us just verbally, Ken, what did you come up with?
Oh, okay. Mr. Oh, has he disappeared? There he is. Clay, Nath, and I agreed quite a bit that essentially safety is the issue, that the individual has to feel safe and has to trust that he can proceed without any risk, and that the risk comes from risk of loss of friendship. In some societies, going against the norm is risks imprisonment or death. So safety was the issue, and I'll keep it brief at that.
Beautiful, love it. Terrific contribution. Yes, and by the way, the research does suggest that you're spot on about that. A safe conversational environment is much more likely to lead to the truth than one that is feels or is unsafe. Good. Would Philip, will you share, or Josie, would you guys share a couple what you've came up with?
I can share. Philip was your insights were really good, but mine that I kind of gathered was touching on like the safe aspect of how when you are with a friend, your walls that we put up every day kind of come down, so you are able to feel safe, as you said, but you're also able to just know that whatever you say will be taken like from your friend as a loving way and not like an attacking way, I guess. And so you'll know going into that argument that you might disagree in verbal terms, but in your like friendship, it won't really be battered as much. Or that's, I guess, the hope and goal. I know that a lot of people lose friends over some crazy stuff nowadays.
So Josie had mentioned trust in the breakout and sort of openness and vulnerability too, right? When your walls come down, you're actually trusting others to engage you in that conversation in a way that's not hurtful. So I think those are wonderful. Something else Josie just said, I want to flag it. She says you can sort of trust that people will take your words in the best possible light rather than twist them and interpret them in the worst possible light. Philosophers have a word for this. It's called the principle of charity, which is do your best to understand what the other person's saying sympathetically. Do your best to understand it for whatever truth may be in it. Don't interpret it in the worst possible light and then knock it down. That's not the kind of thing that makes for fruitful conversations. Thank you, Josie. Philip?
Yeah, I think one contribution I made was I made the suggestion that perhaps when you speak with friends, you understand essentially what they mean by the language they use. So say they mean prayer in one sort of way, you will be able to understand what they mean by the word prayer because you are their friend. Similarly, when they speak of war or they speak of this event or morality or ethics, then you will be able to understand exactly what they mean because you are the friend. And that again ties into that principle of charity, but from a different direction, perhaps.
Well, lovely. Zafir, can you share something?
Well, you know what I'm going to say. It's avoid absolute certainty and be willing to change your position, which could be, I suppose, summarized as we said, as true good faith. There's actually you're not going in to actually have an argument, a little bit of a quibble with the quote, and you're not going in thinking you know the truth. You're going in to discuss and working together to find out the truth. That's but that's no surprise to you.
No, but I wanted to hear you say it here. That's beautiful. Yeah, in my book, I call the right attitude to have in a difficult conversation is let's find out mode. You're working together collaboratively with your partner to try to deepen your understanding and arrive at the truth without assuming that you have it already. Very nice. Thank you, Zafir. Hey, Rob,
I was just going to draw attention to the chat, Andy. I don't know if you wanted to, or if you've noticed any of those. I thought Hank shared something that was kind of a good question. It says, having a mind of one's own, expressing those beliefs in the context of an unspoken implicit group norms. How does an entity create an atmosphere where this can go on? So yeah, I guess the importance of having a group where you have good norms of argument can be important to finding the truth together.
Nice. Very nice. Let's keep going with what we're finding here in the chat. Let's see. Charlie says we must be willing to peel back misconceptions and sometimes decades of subtle and not so subtle negative messaging. So a willingness to rethink things. It's important that the participants bring a willingness to rethink. Is that a fair summary, Charlie?
Where is he?
I think he's looking for the mute button, maybe. I'll come back to you, Charlie, if you find the mute button. It should be at the bottom left, I think, of the screen. Stephanie, let's see. She writes, I think that the quote, "The truth springs from arguments among friends," can contain wisdom if we define argument to mean open-minded discussion, and we define friends to mean that all involved are safe to discuss topics with. Very nice. Yeah.
Andy?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's see if I can make things a little more complicated.
All right.
If we think of the Buddhist concept of I think Maya, illusion, okay, and not take it to not take it to its nth degree of everything's an illusion once you drop the ego and then they go enlightenment. I don't know, but we are in the evolution of in evolutionary biology thinking, we have self-deceit and other deceit as a survival mechanism to sustain yourself in a group, to make sure you're valued in the group and make sure you don't get kicked out.
Yes.
All right. So if you build in illusion or self and other deceit, how do you know that the people in the room or in the group are aware of that side of them? Let's call it the ego side, if you want to think in Buddhism, is not bullshitting themselves or others. How do I know that? Can you trust that I'm aware of my bullshitter side that has been practiced since I was in the womb or something, or anybody else's? Or how do you get along in a group? And how do you make friends and influence people, by Dale Carnegie? So there is this thing about how do you get an illusion detector? Some people have written some books on bullshit detecting.
Yes.
I think we've come across it. And so I bring that up as it's very tricky, but at least something to think about. How do you build that into any working group?
Yeah.
I got to keep my job, so I got to say what I got to say to keep my job, or it's not even conscious.
That's right. I mean, so maintaining your standing within the group, usually the group that includes the people you're talking with, is often wanting to stay on good terms.
Yeah.
Or become on better terms with the people you're talking with is key. Rob Swigert in our group came up with the phrase goodwill, that one of the qualities of an environment that tends to conduce to truth is parties that bring goodwill to the table. Good faith, I think, was Saphir's term for it, or collaborative intent, right?
Or Andy, if we bring forth the illusion of goodwill, as opposed to genuine good. I mean, these are just
well, some people fake
micro
it, right?
concepts. But
Some people fake it to win our trust and
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
violate that trust. That's certainly
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
Yasmina?
In our group, it was also mentioned that a nudge was necessary to bring up the discussion. In this case, it was officers calling a meeting or something like that, in a naval setting, Navy setting. So sometimes you need that, no? That someone pushes you into having to discuss it, no?
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, of course, one of the things that came up in our group was Hume's choice of the word argument. It's not just that the truth springs from conversations among friends. His claim is that the truth springs from arguments among friends. Arguments being a kind of discourse that has an element of conflict, an element of contention in it. So how do you manage that contention? How do you manage that conflict while still preserving the friendship? That if you can combine those two things into a conversation, the conversation can both deepen your friendship and your relationships with those you're talking to, while also illuminating and educating and expanding your mind. But it can be a tricky balance. And I think the fact that so many conversations have become treacherous is that something about the online environment is making it so that people don't feel safe discussing difficult subjects anymore. Is there something about the digital world we live in now that makes us more triggerable, more easily triggered than we used to be?
Oh, for sure.
If I might,
Please, Ken, jump in.
I might just pop in and say the problem is that we don't know who's seeing it. And so we don't have that aura of trust and safety that we've all referred to that in some fashion in this group. So we have no idea we're tossing it out there. We're tossing out a bone and we don't know what dog is going to come chew on it.
Very nice. Clay, you had
Yeah, similar point, but also I think you wanted to avoid the term tribe. The group that you want to consider yourself affiliated with may only be available to you online, in effect, behind closed doors, within a small environment of like-minded people, such as this may presumably be, in which case fruitful argument doesn't take place.
Yeah. And I've come to believe that when we postpone the difficult conversations because we're fearful, that issues go unresolved and eventually catch up to us. Carolyn?
Yes, I was just gonna say social media creates echo chambers, and going back to what Clay just was saying. And I know most of us know that there's algorithms that actually produce more of that echo chamber. And so that's why I believe it's really beneficial to try to go outside of our, I guess we don't like the word tribe, but to go out and actively seek discussions, arguments from other people to gain a more perspective and unlearn what we've already learned.
Beautiful. Thank you, Carolyn. Let's see, Zafir?
Actually, I think Yasmina's had her hand up for longer than I have.
Okay, Yasmina.
Thank you. I would add from my experience in parenting that it's important to make sure everyone is well slept, well fed, Because many people come to the discussions from a point of deprivation. And I wonder also how much of that affects the argument and the search for truth. It can also be emotional deprivation.
Yasmina, you are so spot on. I'm quite confident that lack of food or lack of sleep can affect mental immune function. Absolutely. It also turns out that despair, existential despair, feeling as though your life isn't going anywhere, feeling as though you've been given a raw deal in life, things like that actually, we now know, affect your ability to think clearly. So if we want to create truth, if we want to build a society that's conducive to truth, we actually need to build a society where far fewer people experience despair. Sophia.
I'm not entirely sure that the problems are actually getting worse. So groups have always been hostile to other groups, and that's nothing new. And what the internet's allowed to happen is for people with fringe beliefs to actually form a group, where before they just would have been a person with a fringe belief that we thought was a little bit crazy, but now they're able to actually form a group and communicate with other people with similar sort of beliefs. And the key thing that I've found with discussing with these people with fringe beliefs is not going in telling them they're wrong. Just being really open and sort of like, I don't understand this. Can you explain it to me? Yeah, a street epistemology sort of approach. But then also a little bit, and this is the really hard bit, is actually indicate that I could be wrong and that I've got a willingness to change my mind. And then they'll talk to you a bit more likely, rather than actually seeing me as an opponent. As soon as they see me as an opponent, forget about it. It's all off. But if you can actually talk to them and acknowledge that you could be wrong, then they're a little happier to actually speak to you a little more openly.
That's beautiful, Zafir. I want to take that and maybe put a bow on this so that we can close up at the top of the hour. Yeah, Zafir, what kind of anthropologist or ethnographer did you say you like to call yourself now?
No, just an amateur. I'm not getting paid. If anyone wants to fund me, fine.
I will say this, though. I do admire Zafir's ability to seek out conversations with people who disagree with him deeply. And he's a really good listener. He's really good at just saying, help me understand. Tell me more. Can you clarify what you're saying? He has come to understand that questions like that have an almost magical power to de-escalate the conversation and put them into a more fruitful mode. I want to try to break down. He mentioned street epistemology. Street epistemologists are people who seek out these conversations and practice the art of what some call cordial curiosity. If you can just bring questions and just try to understand other people's points of view, a lot of times that gives them permission to reflect deeply on their own views and in some cases change them. Just being that kind of listening presence is really important. So you can learn more about street epistemology. Street epistemology movement is led by a guy who's a member of our coalition. What I wanted to do in the few minutes that remain is try to break down the technique that people like Zafir use and people like Anthony Bosco and the other street epistemologists use. This is a technique that philosophers have been using for a long time. They call it basically it's the Socratic method. And if you are a fan, like I am, of Socrates, the ancient Greek philosopher, you'll recognize this. But what I call the new Socratic method, and here I'm going to share my screen one last time. So this is just a one-page document that describes something I call the new Socratic method. And you can find it on both the Mental Immunity Project page and the CIRSE website. So you're welcome to download it there and if you're interested. But let me just kind of try to break down what I think of as good, as a best practice for having difficult conversations. So the moment somebody says something that feels like a disagreement that feels like a conflict, just notice that a conflict has arisen. First thing you need to do is do an internal check. Oh, okay, a conflict has arisen. Second, you need to sort of say, oh, that means I need to monitor my emotions. Because each of us has, I think, a duty to monitor our emotions so that our emotions don't get the best of us and turn us into somebody who worsens the situation instead of makes it better. I think the very best people at this learn not to react to emotional triggers, but instead to just refuse to react quickly and emotionally, because they understand that that almost always tends to worsen the situation. When Zafir says to his Jehovah's Witness friend or whatever, I might be wrong about this, but just tell me more. He's basically saying, I'm willing to suspend judgment for a while if you'll join me in that suspension of judgment so we can examine the situation from all points of view. And if you show your willingness to suspend judgment, a lot of times they'll be willing to suspend judgment too. Get curious. I forget who it was who said that curiosity is also kind of like a magical trait. If you can just exude the desire to learn from the other guy, a lot of times that makes them feel respected, makes them feel heard. A curiosity, it's very hard to be a bad version of yourself when you're curious, when you're wondering. So try to be curious and to exemplify that curiosity, largely through the use of questions. Treat disagreement and challenges to your points of view not as threats, but as opportunities. It might just be an opportunity to learn. When Hume pointed out that arguments are one of the ingredients that help us move closer to the truth, he understood that we need to work through conflict to approach wisdom and the truth. So when conflict does arise, don't push it away as an unwelcome thing just likely to damage your relationships. Welcome it as an opportunity to learn and maybe unlearn, and just understand that you need to regulate your own emotions so that to help it go well. Again, questions are key, and clarifying questions are the best of all. Some of the questions you might be tempted to ask first and foremost are critical questions, questions that point to flaws in the other person's point of view. If you can postpone the moment where you are actually challenging or criticizing and stick to just clarifying questions until the trust has been established, that can work wonders for a difficult conversation. So always a good idea when you hear somebody explain their point of view on whether the earth is flat or their views about COVID vaccines or whatever, to reflect back what you heard them say. Show them that you were listening by summarizing it in your own words and showing that you really heard them. That's validating. And when people feel heard, their own defenses come down, and then they're might be willing to learn from you. So the New Socratic Method is my way of trying to sort of sum up that bundle of mental habits, conversational habits. And I think we can all practice them. We can all get better at them, and we can all become the kind of people who can transform treacherous conversations into fruitful ones that bridge deep divides. But we need people who have the courage to enter into those conversations, even though it can feel unsafe doing so. Okay, I think we wanted to keep this to an hour. I can see we're there. Luke has put, if you're willing to give us another minute or two to give us your feedback on this workshop, we'd be grateful. There's a link now in the chat window. If you click on that, there's just a few quick questions that'll take you no more than a minute to answer. We'd love your feedback. Wanted to thank you all for coming out today. Thank you for sharing your insights. Turns out we can all contribute to our shared understanding of mental immunity by simply drawing from our practical wisdom that we've gained in all of the conversations we've had. And if you just approach the next conversation mindfully and try to be the best version of yourself, I'm sure you can become part of the solution. So thanks very much. In future versions of this workshop, we may be working on other dimensions of thinking skills. We hope you'll join us for those. And thanks so much for coming tonight.
Very much.
Thank you.
Keep us posted.
Are these going to occur regularly?
We don't know for sure. We hope to, especially if you all like what you've seen and would like more. We'll see what we can do. All right. Thanks, guys. Take care.